Friends, Bison, country folk, great to be with you again today. Um, I had a really great week last week. Went to Nashville. The purpose of the trip was to do some executive facilitation, which is kind of my day job, bread and butter stuff. And I spent a couple days there in advance and got to do some really amazing stuff. In Nashville is a wall on Bicentennial Park. It basically goes from 1 billion years BCE all the way to 1996, which was Nashville's bicentennial, basically, or I should say Tennessee's bicentennial. And it was fascinating. Like, obviously, all the geological prehistoric stuff, and the people of Tennessee's kind of reckoning with race and genocide. I learned that our bison are the ones who are responsible for the Natchez Trace that goes through Tennessee, and basically is a bison trail that where the bison used to go to where downtown Nashville was a big salt lick, and so the bison would go there. Well, it's kind of cool little bison fun fact. The other amazing thing was that I got to go on the Journey to Jubilee tour at the Belle Meade Plantation, which I highly recommend. If you find yourself in Nashville for any reason, do this one thing, because it is probably the most authentic, heartbreaking immersion into the life of what it's basically like to be enslaved. The docent / interpreter folks are very earnest. They do like research around the clock. And so I did this tour with my ex in 2021, redid it. It's now 90 minutes instead of 60, and the tour is probably like 5% the same as the one I did 4 years ago. So, and that is because they're constantly doing research, both, in terms of like tracking down descendants of folks who were enslaved there, but also archaeological digs. So they're always discovering new stuff about what it was like. It was powerful. And I was lucky. I was the only one on the tour, so I basically got a one-on-one like deep dive and ask all kinds of questions and all that. So it was fun. And the purpose of having the visit being longer than what was required for work was I was trying to set up a book event, like a bison medicine type event. That fell through, so I just ended up getting to be a tourist and explore Music City and obviously all the historical stuff that I just mentioned. So with that, we're gonna explore probably the most heady, the most kind of research-driven part of the book, and that's Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. So this is part 7, and the reason that this is so research-driven is because as we've talked about, like the three components of a functioning democracy. The idea, so all created equal, which is what we explored in the last part, is at the intellectual, mental construct level. And then at the political economy level, that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And a government, and a political economy, rather. So not just the government, but in partnership with the private sector, is tasked with delivering these things and guarantees them. Like, that is what it's about. That's what that government is about. And if it fails to do that, then we have every right to overthrow it or demand something different. So that's what we're going to explore today. And to do that, we actually, this is not spiritual. This is not historical. This is like, here's what these words mean. Here's what the science says about these words. Here's how to deliver it. Now, I don't go into specific policy, kind of governmental structure type reformations or anything like that. In the appendix, I do. So in Appendix B, mostly, a citizens' constitutional convention looks at like how might we reconstitute ourselves to actually deliver on this piece. But it's important just to know like what it is that we're talking about. Like if we're still committed to this, then it means that kind of thing. So We'll dive in. As you know, this is all free in the spirit of the Bison giveaway. And so if you would like to pay it forward, please consider a donation to the American Prairie, americanprairie.org. And also big thanks to Jared Brick, Brickhouse Media, for putting all this together and making it shine. Let's dive in. So I begin with this quote from Rabbi Isaac M. Wise, who I believe is like a Cincinnati leader of a synagogue. And so this is in 1869. So the Civil War has completed. We have refounded the nation on all created equal. And so here's what Rabbi Isaac M. Wise has to say. Quote, "Glory to the memory of the heroes of the Revolution, to the generous godfathers of liberty. Glory to the memory of George Washington and his heroic compatriots. They were the chosen instruments in the hands of Providence to turn the wheel of events in favor of liberty forever, and they proved worthy of their great mission, of their instrumental work. The millions of oppressed men and women in all countries, whose chains have been broken, and whose prisons have been raised, are the grand chorus who sing the praise of the American Revolution. The framers of the Constitution were wise enough to confront the destiny of the nation. The people of the United States, on accepting this Constitution, had formally and solemnly chosen its destiny to be now and forever the palladium of liberty. We are Americans. Every child born on this soil is Americanized. Our country has a peculiar people to work out a new and peculiar destiny. Nothing can arrest our progress. Nothing drag down our country from her high place in history, except our own wickedness, working a willful desertion of our destiny, the desertion from the ideal of liberty. As long as we cling to this ideal, we will be in honor, glory, wealth, and prosperity." End quote. So what the rabbi is inviting us into is that this Constitution is essentially a marriage proposal that the American people chose and continue to uphold, and that all who are here are effectively Americanized. And they obviously the United States of America use of the term. And Rabbi was wise in that he said, we inspired the world to do this amazing work, and the only thing that can tear us down is our own wickedness, our own witiko, like the eagle, basically. And he's like, as long as we cling to the ideal of liberty in the truest sense, which we'll explore here in a little bit, and that means to also be our brother's keeper. So it's not freedom to do whatever you want. It's freedom to do whatever you want that advances the common good. Paraphrasing, of course. As long as we do that, we will be in glory, honor, wealth, prosperity. So the next quote is from an artist named Umo. And he says, "Americans are the least rebellious people on earth, who also like to congratulate themselves on being rebellious more than anyone. Quote, I'm a renegade. My favorite people are the cops and my boss." End quote. So I include that in here because of this toddler's view of liberty that we'll explore in a second. That there's a enlightened, full, complete way to hold liberty, and then there is a toddler's or tyrant's view of liberty, which is I do whatever I want, damn the consequences. And what Americans, folks here have is essentially not liberty. There's a few folks who have this toddler's liberty, who just like go around throwing beer cans up the car and, acting like they own the place when they don't. But most of us are like clinging to this like very bizarre notion of being free, but we're not free. We're like shackled by our employers generally. It's not very free. terms of how we relate to them. And that a piece of that is that, for many of us, our healthcare, our housing, our kids, like we can't be free because we have to keep making our bosses happy so that these things get paid for. So we'll explore this a little bit later with what FDR talks about, like necessitous men cannot be free. If you're needy, you can't be free. So we'll talk more about that. So we fulfill all created equal by delivering the goods to ensure that all who reside here have everything they need to be created equal. We are guided to deliver the goods that empower all to fulfill their potential and realize equality by our twin animating aspirations in the body. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is the body. So like the head being all created equal. And in spirit, e pluribus unum, which we'll explore in the next part 8. So let's take a deeper dive into what these words, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, actually mean. In the 1700s and 1800s, life was, in retrospect, a very short and brutal affair, as evidenced by the life expectancy of 35 years in the year 1800, with 46% of children not reaching their 5th birthday. Our time on the earth was short, and given the need to focus on daily survival, our ability to spend exploring what it means to be alive, or to live a good life, or read the seminal texts of religion or philosophy, or have an informed and fruitful debate was nil. And as we explored in part 2, it has again become nil for most of us. I'll pause here for a second, because this is like a big pain point. Because we are necessitous, meaning like three quarters of us are paycheck to paycheck. And even those of us who are not paycheck to paycheck are still working around the clock to get all the luxuries and necessities to try to ensure our kids have everything that they need to get into college, basically, which is another soapbox I'll stand on later. So, I mean, essentially, the ability to pick your head up, to stand up, to look ahead is like diminished. Everyone is just like down, like focusing on what's in front of them, trying to, survive, get ahead, provide for the kids. So those of us who have, like the freedom, the leisure to actually pick our heads up, I'm aware of my privilege to do that. We can't engage folks in conversation. Nobody's got any time. And, especially on the coast, especially in cities where there's more and more economic demand. So we have this very hard dynamic that if we want to change culture, we have trouble getting anyone's attention. People aren't reading anymore. That's not a good thing. I mean, they're reading their emails and responding to their bosses and customers, all that, but they're not reading books. They're not sitting around council fires. Like it's just work, and then until you get sick or die. So back to our previously scheduled programming. While many of us could read, we had no libraries. Most of us only had access to extremely biased newspapers and trashy dime novels. Sound familiar? It's basically, a cut at journalism, but also just how we're spending our time, like watching trash as a nation. It's usually poorly produced, scripted, or reality programming. But the scientific tradition was just getting started, and even among the most learned, their understanding was limited to borrowed books and writing each other letters a couple times a year. The fields of psychology, sociology, anthropology, and ecology had not yet been developed. While many of our framers understood and respected the cultures and practices of the First Nations that supported the Kainakawa, they lacked the knowledge, the academies, and the critical frames necessary to transform an exploited, traumatized, ragtag group of European exiles into a truly free and unified nation of mature adults. I'll repeat that. So while our framers understood the culture, the character, the moral fiber, the gravitas of First Nations leaders and their cultures, they didn't have a bridge to take these, like I said, ragtag exiled group of European settler colonialists, most of them who've been kind of tricked to come here by either like through some kind of indentured servitude or some admin. So the word Rehoboth, I believe, means like open, beautiful place or something. They had founded all these towns called Rehoboth and had marketed this extensively to Europeans, saying it's wide open prairie. You can make your own fortune. You can come. It'll be great. And so all these folks were like, not liking feudalism, and they had the means, came over here, and they'd been exploited, and now they were lied to, and then they found themselves here. And how do you take somebody who's never done any inner work, never had any meaningful ritual, never known any grown-ass adults in their lives, and then take a nation of them, granted it was only, I don't know how many million, but let's say maybe 20 million Civil War time. How do you take them and turn them into a nation of mature adults? We didn't have any of the things we would need to do that. But now we have access to significantly better science and best practices to legislate and manifest the true meaning of these powerful words. Let us begin. So begin with the word life. So which is like, what does life actually mean? L-I-F-E. So these four disciplines, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and ecology, among dozens of other new and important subdisciplines, have revealed much more about what it means to secure the right to life and cultivate a quality life. With the help of these disciplines, we now understand that life must be substantially more purposeful, inclusive, communal, and safe. So let's look at purpose. So life isn't about filling up our empty minds and lives. We are not a tabula rasa, which means we have a blank slate, devoid of emotions, connection, purpose, and inspiration. We each had unique gifts that need to be developed and shared. Having a life purpose, defined here as a transcendent identity that is larger than a concern for self and family, that calls us to awaken our most cherished virtues, greatest gifts, and apply them towards a vision that is personally inspiring. I'll pause here for a second because, as most of y'all know, I've written a lot about this, studied it, and trained in it and practiced it. So the model that I use when I do one-on-one work, which is not very often anymore, has 10 aspects of purpose. But in terms of what purpose is, as largely agreed upon by the field of purpose practitioners, it is what I just shared. So it is a transcendent identity. So it's like I identify not as Brandon or Peel or my lineage of Peels and Thompsons and all that, or any future progeny, which I have a vasectomy, so that's not going to happen. But like I'm not identifying as my bloodline. It is beyond my family. So this is a transcendent identity, larger than my concern for myself or my family. That calls me to awaken my most cherished virtues. So the ways that I'm called to be in this world, regardless of the context. So for me, that's courage, compassion, integrity, wonder. Those are the four that guide me. And yours are going to be different. And my greatest gifts. So in this case, it's speaking, writing, facilitating, convening, evangelizing, and applying them towards a vision that is personally inspiring. So for me, it's essentially a world that works for all, and with the United States as a potential leader in that pursuit. So that's what we mean by purpose, and everyone has that latent purpose potential within them, just needs to be activated. So it's not, I'm not talking about me or special people. It's like every one of our 803 or 8.3 billion brothers and sisters on this planet have a purpose. They have a vision, virtues, gifts that they can apply and activate. So having a life purpose is correlated with a wide range of positive life outcomes, such as a 7-year increase in longevity, higher levels of income and wealth, better mental health, improved cognitive functioning, 32% fewer doctor's visits, better sex, more and more robust relationships, and stronger marriages. Thus, if our concept of life is to mean a long, prosperous, fulfilled, healthy, joyful, and connected life, it must include the liberating and enlivening power of purpose. So I just said a bunch of stuff. All of it's, of course, in the endnotes. Or you can go to scienceofpurpose.org and see for yourself. There's way more research on what purpose actually does to us biologically, psychologically, socially, civically, economically, professionally, as leaders. I mean, it's not a panacea, but it is a best practice. So if we're thinking about life as being like something that should be good, like I said, like long, prosperous, fulfilled, healthy, joyful, connected, purpose is a big way to get there. And we'll talk about how to actually roll that out at scale in a bit. So let's look at inclusion now. We now understand that life means more than the lives of wealthy white men. Since the 1850s, our nation's concept of the right to life has increasingly come to include the lives of women, people of color, and LGBTQIA plus folks. It now includes children, the elderly, and the disabled. Because of our understanding of ecology and quantum entanglement, we now understand that life means the abiding kinship and mutual flourishing of all people and all life forms that inhabit our ecologies and upon which we all depend. So I'm going to unpack that briefly. So we know that life is all humans, not just rich white men. And we know that it is not just humans either. And we know that we as humans are quantumly entangled, like at the physical level. So I'm going to, I probably shouldn't do this, but I grew up on hip hop, and when you diss Dre, you diss yourself, like literally. Like when we diminish the lives of others, we literally diminish our own life because we are all interconnected. It's not just a nice, flowery thing. It's proven now. What affects one affects us all, as Martin Luther King said. So life means thriving, biodiverse watersheds. It means that our air is healthy to breathe. Our water is clean to drink. Our food is healthy to eat. Our increasingly diverse communities are safe and joyful to live in. And our homes are affordable to rent and own, which means our housing costs are no greater than 30% of our income. So that's what essentially like living wage studies suggest that like if housing costs are greater than 30%, you're not making a living wage, basically. Further, as we are increasingly a racially diverse nation, nurturing and sustaining our diverse society means opening ourselves to all life in its diversity and splendor. It means being secure in who we are, fulfilling our potential, and honoring our fellow country folk for who they are and in all their splendor and diversity. Here again, purpose plays a critical role in helping us flourish together. Having a connection to our life purpose reduces our anxiety in diverse environments by 4 times and increases our desire to live in diverse communities by 4 times. So let's pause on that for a second. So when we know our purpose, we relate to ourselves as that transcendent identity. It's not about being white or being male or being, Korean or female or anything like that. It's like, I'm about this bigger thing. And that is kind of like a Trojan horse. It makes us like really curious, really like excited to learn about other people because you're not trying to protect because you're part of this bigger idea that, and these virtues and these gifts that can be expressed in all these different ways. And so you're not like all of my beauty and gifts for just, people like me. You're like, no. So it kind of engenders a generosity, basically. The other piece is that because you have gone on this this journey, moving from your kind of socialized self, your caste of your race, gender, income, education, all that, to this larger transcendent identity, you understand that potential lies in everybody as well. So like you're seeing the dignity and the beauty of other souls. Like oh, if only the right conditions, the right conversations were had, that person could shine as opposed to how they're showing up. So it makes you more like able and willing and desirous to be in community with lots of folks who are not exactly like you. So this orientation towards diversity is likely due to the central role that purpose plays in driving our growth and development into full adults, leaders, and elders. It is perhaps no surprise that a strong sense of purpose in life is correlated with a wide range of pro-social virtues, beliefs, and behaviors, including wisdom, transcendence, curiosity, and temperance, gratitude, compassion, and grit, generativity, personal growth, and integrity, other-centeredness, reflection on past and future, consideration of our impacts on others, forgiveness and post-traumatic growth, conscientiousness, openness to experience, and agreeableness with a negative correlation with neuroticism. So everything I just shared there is sourced in a research study. Again, all that's on scienceofpurpose.org or in the notes. As such, having a connection to our individual life purpose empowers us to become the type of human that can flourish in any society, especially one as diverse as ours, and one that is committed to the realization of life, equality, liberty, and happiness for all. So let's look at this next distinction of life. So we just talked about purpose itself, and then inclusion, and the manner in which purpose drives inclusion. Now look at community. We'll begin with a quote from Bell Hooks. I think that part of what a culture of domination has done is raise that romantic relationship as the single most important bond, when of course the single most important bond is that of community, end quote. Bison are social animals that travel in herds. Therefore, there's no such thing as a single bison or even a bison nuclear family. We would do well to follow their lead by absolving ourselves of the myth of hyper-individualism and the mistaken belief and cultural practice of trying to survive as a married couple with children. Some households do, quote, make it work, but that almost always involves throwing money into the gaping hole that a community would otherwise fill. Today, most nuclear households can only keep bellies full and appearances up by decimating the environment, exploiting a racialized underclass to provide them with child and home care. Just as the primary unit of the bison is the herd, the primary unit of humans is not an individual, couple, or a family. It is the community. If we want to live in accordance with our true nature, if we want to center on our life, we should consider that we are first a village. Because our neurobiology can only flourish in connection with others, we need to give special attention to creating and sustaining communities of care. Caring and contribution are the key to our social and emotional health, driving social integration, increasing our lifespans by 10% or 8 years, and increasing the likelihood that we will reach the age of 85 by 41%. When we develop high-trust relationships with each other, we are able to share our fears and anxieties and discover new perspectives on our challenges. Further, regular check-ins with those we care about empower us to complete our stress cycles and avoid burnout. However, can we truly belong to a community if we first do not belong to ourselves? Can we be truly loved and cared for by others if we don't even know who we are? If our identity is only sourced in the stories and norms of our caste, our unique composition of gender, race, sexuality, religion, income, education, how can others love us for who we really are? Once again, being connected to our individual life purpose plays a critical role. Experiencing the purpose activation process initiates a move in our identities from the socialized self to our authentic self, so that transcendent identity. Or what Harvard psychologist Robert Kegan terms, quote, the self-authoring mind and the self-transforming mind. We are able to source our identity and choices not in our default groups or what family or society tells us we are, primarily in who we truly are, our unique, multidimensional, and evolutionary life purpose. From this place, we can more authentically self-express, be seen and valued for who we really are, make aligned choices, and build authentic community. I'll share more on this in part 9. Thus, life is not simply a measure of the biological health of a human organism or the economic health of a household, but also a matter of emotional health, social integration, and vibrant and equitable communities. Life, so our concept of life, must now include the activation of purpose, experience of empathy, trust, and mutual concern in all of our core life contexts, in our love life, our family, in our community, at work, and in our neighborhood and civic life. So, just shared a bunch there. What I mean by like we can't belong unless we belong to ourselves is that like until I take possession of who I really am as this, you know, purpose, this transcendent identity, and until I both take possession of it and say I belong to that identity, I don't have license to self-express, to bring forth my gifts and my virtues, because I'm in a socialized self. I can only self-express to the extent it keeps me in good standing with my uh, community, which not a bad thing, by the way, not a bad thing. But if that community isn't also actualized, they don't care who you are. They would just want a specific output out of you, and most of us know what those outputs are. If you're a woman, it's like you gotta be pretty, thin, young, bear children, that sort of stuff. If you're a man, you have to be like big, tall, strong, successful, that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying that's the only narrative of all communities, but that's an example of narratives that tend to proliferate here in the United States. So the manner in which we can actually self-express is constrained by whatever societal expectations are upon us. That's why we have to do the purpose journey, because that liberates us and makes that move from the socialized self to the authentic self, from the caste identity to the transcendent identity. Then we can know and love ourselves, and other people can finally see us. Other people can finally say, oh, that's who that is. Oh, right on. More. Give me more of that. And so we can actually truly belong, because we have a bunch of people who actually see who we are and what we're up to. So let's move on. The last distinction here of life: safety. Um, let's share a quick story in this. So as a 6'2", 220-pound white guy, I feel safe most of the time. If not all the time, like maybe like 0.001% of my time I don't feel safe. And so I had to move through the world with very little precaution, very little thought. Like, when I want to go somewhere, I want my ticket and just go there and figure it out. In my last marriage, I realized that that's not everyone's experience. So my ex is about half my size, 5'4", $110. And she needs to plan a lot of stuff, like, because she was raised not feeling safe. Her community is not safe. As you may have heard, like, we have a rape culture that just beats up and rapes women. And so a lion's share of her values, her expression, her way of being in our relationship was about making her feel safe. And I didn't appreciate that until we got married. And still, heartbreaking to think about. Like how much safety constrains or is a driving factor of our decisions. Like how much of this insane amount of like wealth concentration would happen if we actually felt safe. But I think a lot of people use money as like a way to like meet that need, but we all know it doesn't really meet that need. So let's dive in. It goes without saying that life doesn't mean running for your life. Rather, it means that your life feels safe and secure, free from disease, violence, poverty, and homelessness, and the threat of disease, violence, poverty, and homelessness. As we have explored, 97% of us live unhealthy lifestyles, and 3/4 of us do not make a living wage. So we're not physically and economically safe. We are also emotionally unsafe, as 54% of us believe our fellow citizens are the greatest threat to our nation. This is especially terrifying because we have 400 million guns in the nation, and over 20 million of these are assault rifles, whose sole purpose is to quickly kill a large number of humans. So let's pause there for a second. We're afraid of each other. And some would say for good reason. We're uneducated. We have a lot of hate, animosity, and we're heavily armed and not well policed. So we're doing it wrong in terms of danger. As should be clear by now, our lack of safety is not uniformly felt. Women live in fear of assault and rape. Given our history of racial prejudice, slavery, and discrimination, most BIPOC communities live in constant fear of police terror. It should be clear that we currently do not have adequate economies, laws, institutions, I'll just say cultures too, to safely secure life. Properly considered, life means not investing our time in protecting ourselves from poverty or from the fear of each other, but rather that the rights to and protections of life are secured through our economies, laws, and institutions, where we don't have to think about being safe or having enough money for food and shelter. When life is safe and we are protected, we are free to experience liberty and pursue happiness, and can invest our time in creative pursuits, leisure, and in service to others, each according to our unique purpose. So safety, like if we're not safe, we don't have the opportunity to be free, because we're constantly trying to put spackle on the wall of the castle. We're happy. Like if we're running fear all the time, like everyone could die all the time, or they're thinking about our kids, especially. Like, again, I don't have kids, but I know from other parents, they're afraid their kids are going to die all the time because essentially there's a bunch of trucks and SUVs going crazy. We're not educated. Everyone's hopped up on something now, legal or illegal. And of course, you got the screens that are coming for everyone too. And it's like everyone's like running fear, like a giant fear protocol. And so with that, we don't get to be free or happy because we're, mainlining fear. All right. So that is life. Let's move on to liberty. In a very real sense, liberty is the Native American way. As Benjamin Franklin observed, quote, having few artificial wants, they have abundance of leisure for improvement by conversation. Our laborious manner of life, so meaning with the settler colonialists, compared with theirs, they esteem slavish and base, end quote. So it's basically saying because we're essentially high maintenance people who have to do all this crazy stuff to impress each other, to be safe and all that kind of stuff, that we're slaves. And base, and natives who needed a lot less were much more free. As FDR understood and invoked in his Rendezvous with Destiny speech, quote, necessitous men are not free men. Liberty requires opportunity to make a decent living, a living decent according to the standard of our times, a living which gives a man not only enough to live by, but something to live for. For too many, the political equality we once had won was meaningless in the face of economic inequality, end quote. So, talked about this already, but you're not free if you're just free before the law, or equal before the law, or you have rights. You're free when you have enough. You have enough to go around, when you know that there's always going to be food and shelter. So we cannot be free if we're impoverished. We must have a way to make a living wage, enough to provide for our families and pursue our passions. Unfortunately, the living wage exceeds the minimum wage by between 20 to 500%, depending on where we call home. So living wage is enough to provide for ourselves and our family and to pursue our passions. But depending on where you live, the living wage is is much, much higher than what the minimum wage is, and whether you're the prevailing wage. And so most of us, as we've shared, 3/4 of us are paycheck to paycheck. So most of us do not earn a living wage. Rather, all those profits are being eaten up by Wall Street and real estate companies, as we talked about in part 2. Healthcare companies. So let us marinate on what liberty really means and how we can get back to its original and full native expression. While many of our framers understood the freedom, leisure, interconnection, power, autonomy, dignity, honor, responsibility, equality, and respect that the indigenous notion of liberty contained, it was not how most folks understood it then and still isn't how most relate to it today. Without understanding liberty in this greater moral, social, economic, spiritual, and ecological context, liberty is reduced to a hyper-individualist license to do whatever you want within the confines of the law or without getting caught breaking it, aka Wetiko. This lesser view of liberty carries with it no responsibilities. It weighs the freedom to exclude equally with the freedom to include. It weighs the freedom to destroy nature equally with the freedom to nourish it. It weighs the freedom to exploit our family equally with the freedom to empower them. This understanding of liberty arbitrarily allows us to exert power through force, such as by denying someone their bodily autonomy. This understanding is what grants the orphanages free rein to exploit us in any way that serves their interests. And they have. This is not true liberty. This is not our purpose, our nation's purpose. This is not the way of the Haudenosaunee. It is definitely not the way of the Bison. Further, our contemporary notion of liberty infers that we have the freedom to choose and presumes that the capacity to choose freely is inherent in all adults. Nothing could be further than the truth, or from the truth. For example, the nascent field of moral psychology has revealed that we are, by default, not free individuals. We do not make decisions selfishly or altruistically, neither from logical analysis nor ethical guidance, but rather groupishly, wherein we make decisions based on a moral calculus, solving for the mean value set of the group with which we identify. So I talk about the socialized self. That's what we're talking about here, is that we're not even doing it consciously. It's usually subconsciously. So if I don't have a transcendent identity, I'm just trying to fit in and stand out within my group so that I'm accepted and deemed a desirable person. So I'm groupish. That's like the general orientation without any kind of transcendent purpose. So this default decision-making process is motivated by our desire to remain included in our group, regardless of the logic, morality, authenticity, congruence, or the impacts of that decision. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, provided the group with which we identify is the whole human community, the web of life, and 7 generations into the future. But for most of us, is a much smaller group. Our family, our coworkers, church community, schoolmates, or neighbors, which are generally segregated along the lines of age, race, gender, and sexuality. And we need only look at the way in which we've ingested dozens of unexamined beliefs and behaviors wholesale from our groups, versus examining the true nature of the need and the best practice for meeting it. For example, our obsession with driving. Driving's insane. We created this whole society around cars. And new research study just came out and said life satisfaction goes down the more time you spend in a car. And that versus bicycles or mass transit, like other developed nations or other Western nations, I should say, who study it logically, yeah, we don't want a bunch of cars. We want clean air. We want no traffic fatalities. We don't want all this expense. Let's just have trains where we need them, bike lanes, everywhere else. Single family homes. Another crazy, insane, expensive, laborious thing versus communal living. Aspirational brands. Um, everyone's guilty of this. Um, Not everyone, but most folks are, where they buy something to impress. Or like they want to own, I think of like, you know, Joey and friends like wearing the Porsche jacket, standing next to the Porsche. There's a lot of that. Um, so aspirational brands versus just don't buy anything. Like most of us can only wear one pair of shorts, one pair of sandals, one t-shirt at a time. So just stop buying things and wait till things break and then fix it or replace it. How about our obsession with monocultured lawns? Like that makes no sense. Like we spend almost no time on it. It's terrible for the environment, destroys, bees and ants and all that kind of stuff. And we could be eating. We could have food. We could have gardens, um, or leaf blowers. Like, yeah, electric leaf blowers are marginally better than regular leaf blowers, but just how about no leaf blowers, period? Just let the leaves just sit there and decompose. They'll be gone by the spring. Cosmetic surgery, like all the ways that we mutilate ourselves. And, it's increasingly men too, in order to like fit some aesthetic that is, it's like the UG Krishnamurti quote. Jiddu Krishnamurti. It's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So this society doesn't value our souls, but rather our output, our looks, all that kind of stuff. And we're chopping ourselves up to fit into it. We got to cut that shit out, right? Or, screens versus doing arts and crafts, or this idea of fairy tale romances that we talked about versus a conscious community and coupling within that. Or all the other, get rich quick schemes that the current administration seems to be doing without any shame, versus like knowing your soul's purpose and expressing that in your vocation, like a right livelihood. So there's all these like nonsensical things that our particular tribe does, and we don't question any of it because it's like that's what the tribe does. So compared to the influence that the customs of our social groups have upon our decisions, the notions of liberty or logic or reason have a very weak grip on our lives. As James Gimple and Dante Cini revealed in the book Our Patchwork Nation, after sifting our nation's demographic data by zip code, they revealed our nation is comprised of 12 segregated groups. So I live in what's called a money burb, so a rich suburb. But there's like campus ones, there's call centers ones. So there's a bunch of like different types of communities that are the same. Like wherever you go, it's the same people doing the same jobs, wearing the same clothes, talking about the same things, voting the same way, eating the same types of restaurants and chains, all that. So each of these 12 segregated groups are like morally, ideologically, economically, socially, and frequently racially homogeneous, like subnations. Each of these groups is composed of people who believe and do more or less the same things. Bring to mind the area you live in. It's likely that you can see where the subnation starts and stops. You know the blocks, the county lines, the tracks, the freeway overpasses that mark the borders. Having lived all around the San Francisco Bay Area, I can guess which train stop a fellow rider will get off with about 80% accuracy, based on their age, their ethnicity, fitness, clothing, behavior, and time of day. Odds are you can do that too. Some part of our brains is always looking for an excuse to say some version of, y'all ain't from around here. Additionally, the last 30 years of neuroscience and gut biome research reveals that our decisions are not made first in the head and then acted upon by our words and our body, but rather our actions are first taken by the bodies, which are influenced by our subconscious mind. And our subconscious is shaped by our immediate diet, family dynamics, childhood traumas, and social conditioning. And these comprise about 95% of our thoughts. Our conscious decision occurs a few microseconds later as a rationalization by the brain to justify what just happened. Oh, I had to do that because blah, blah, blah. But You did it just because you did it. Your subconscious programmed your body to do it. And your brain said, oh, I did that because of this other thing that I thought about a long time ago, which is almost never the case. So even though we have the experience of choosing as individuals with free will, and our orphanages treat us as individual actors with complete agency, the data in our neighborhoods prove otherwise. Whether we like it or not, free will is scientifically only a useful fiction. I know I opened up a big can of worms there. Taken together, our decontextualized sense of toddler or tyrant liberty and our default groupishness and lack of free will present a problem for our nation. We value freedom and liberty, but how can we actually be free if we cannot make choices, or we don't have the agency to actually choose? How can we be free if what we are able to choose from is dictated to us by our groups and the orphanages that run them? To regain the full indigenous experience of liberty, we must create the conditions to liberate ourselves from these impediments. We must do the inner work to be free and experience what our framers originally envisioned, what James Madison fought for as the full and legal rights of conscience, and what Melville called one's own inexorable self. So pause there for a second. We have to do the inner work to have our own purpose and values. And that's the only thing that we can actually true up our beliefs and behavior with, in order to judge how close it was to who we know ourselves to be. So we have to do that work, and over time, as that awareness of our authentic virtues and values, purpose are there, and we can see, oh, I was on alignment there. We start to true up. As our identity or subconscious becomes informed by our authentic self and not as much by our tribal or groupish self. So this liberating process occurs over time and is lifelong, including activities such as healing of traumas of our past, engaging in self-reflection, purpose activation processes, shadow integration work, spiritual practices, experiencing other cultures and travel, and receiving the ongoing reflection from trusted mentors and elders who are further along the journey. The more of this we take on, the more actual freedom and liberty we are able to experience. So before we move to the next piece, identity is at the heart of this, is at the heart of freedom. We have to know who we are to be free to act in accordance with that. If we don't truly know who we are, so that transcendent identity, we're not free. We're just, essentially an NPC, non-player character, acting out a predetermined destiny. And I see it all the time here in Walnut Creek. See folks just doing the same thing their parents did, or what their neighbors are doing. And yeah, there's just not a lot of freedom. I see it in other communities, Concord. You even see it in places that tend to be more purposeful or self-aware. San Francisco, Berkeley, where there's a conscious aesthetic or a conscious group norm around, essentially like cosplaying consciousness or cosplaying purpose. So no one's immune to it. It's just part of who we are. And it's not a bad thing. We're a herd species. We have to attune to what the herd's norms are. And we're not really free unless we develop our own personal sets of purpose to help shape the herd in a good way. So let's move on to happiness. Similarly, happiness was also narrowly understood by most colonists in the 1770s, but among our framers, the term could be thought to refer to either the First Nations understanding of the term or the classical European Enlightenment definition, or some elements of each. The European definition referred more to virtue, describe. One second, I gotta sneeze. Excuse me. Um, the European uh, definition referred more to virtue, describing a state of being good versus feeling good. As Jeffrey Rosen, the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center, writes in his book, The Pursuit of Happiness, happiness means being a lifelong learner. Or I should say, quote, means being a lifelong learner with a commitment to practicing the daily habits that lead to character improvement, self-mastery, flourishing, and growth, end quote. As David Brooks of the New York Times similarly observed, this understanding of happiness is required to sustain a civil society and democracy. Quote, America's founding fathers understood that when private virtue fails, then relationships fail and the constitutional order crumbles. The crucial struggle of our time is not merely the global macro struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. It is the day-to-day micro contest between the forces that honor human dignity and those that spread dehumanization, end quote. And while this is true, there's even more at stake than virtue, according to many First Nations who hold happiness as a sense of well-being brought about by the harmony of our individual and collective identity, the unity of our spiritual, energetic, emotional, and physical experience. Frank Bracco, a scholar of indigenous culture throughout the Americas who synthesized the indigenous wisdom of peoples such as the Wararos, Paiaroa, Arawak, and Maya, states, quote, happiness can be understood as a state of satisfaction or contentment and well-being based on our natural identity. Insofar as our natural identity is concerned, it is generally accepted that we human beings are matter and spirit, body and soul, depending on what we want to call our two characteristic identity components, the dense and the subtle. Well-being's dimension in the concept of happiness refers to the more physical, dense, and external aspects of our being, while satisfaction and contentment's dimension would refer more to the spiritual, the more subtle and inner aspects of our identity, end quote. So, we had talked about, again, these like three legs of the stool of democracy. You've got the idea, you've got the political economy that brings it to life, and then the civic faith, which we'll talk about in the next part. So it's to be happy means that we're clear on what we're about, that we have a life and a culture and a political economy that fulfills it. It's aware of it, and it's always like trying to do it better. And then a deep faith that is about like, it's a transcendent faith, much like the transcendent identity that like we're all better off when we're all better off kind of thing. So the European understanding of happiness and the practice of virtue can be seen as the connected tissue that binds spirit and matter, or collective and individual identity. However, while the indigenous actually practiced the virtues and had the multidimensional experience of happiness, those opining in salons in Europe during the Enlightenment likely faced greater difficulty due to their collective trauma, hierarchical societies, and exploitative political economies. So it's a long way of saying that, while the Europeans did a good job of like trying to like square the circle, like try to understand like what is happiness, virtue, contentment, self-mastery, all that kind of stuff, they couldn't actually do it because of their societies. So they're all traumatized, all like, descended from all the traumas of the hill people coming down to raid people from the plains and valleys over time. And then traumas of empire and, religious conversion to Christianity. And then, of course, their, prevailing princes and kings, all that. So that they've been like traumatized for generations. And then their societies are hierarchical, so there's no equality, just oppression. And their political economies are exploitative. So while they could maybe conceive of it, they couldn't actually experience or practice it. Further, it was common knowledge among those who worked with the First Nations that these First Nations were significantly happier by Western standards. As Arthur Barlow, one of Sir Walter Raleigh's captains, observed in Roanoke, quote, "We found the people the most gentle, loving, and faithful, void of all guile and treason, such as lived after the manner of the Golden Age," end quote. As Thomas Jefferson noted, "I am convinced those societies, the natives, enjoy in their general mass an infinitely greater degree of happiness than those who live under European governments," end quote. As Franklin observed, quote, "Happiness is more generally and equally diffused among savages," end quote. And even Christopher Columbus observed that the people he encountered and then raped, tortured, enslaved, and murdered, the Taino, said, quote, "are the best people in the world and the sanest. They love their neighbors as themselves. They are faithful and do not covet what others have. Their speech is always sweet and gentle, accompanied by a smile," end quote. Further, in a recently unearthed 1942 paper from the pioneering psychologist Abraham Maslow, we now understand what the cultures and personalities of the original caretakers of Turtle Island were. So Maslow, he spent the summer of 1938 with the Siksika Blackfoot in Alberta, Canada, which at the time was one of the few relatively intact native communities on Turtle Island. These people had yet to be fully decimated by poverty, alcohol, and the assimilation policies of the Canadian government and the Christian church. So Maslow got to spend a summer with them, and what he found was that it was a society with remarkable happiness, freedom, self-esteem, and security. He surmised that 70 to 80% of the Blackfoot people were more secure than the top 5% most secure Westerners. So then, on average, the average Blackfoot person is way more secure than the most secure European person. So he had discovered that they had, quote, "feelings of being liked and loved, the perception that the world was a warm and friendly place, a tendency to expect good things to happen, feelings of calm, ease, and relaxation, self-acceptance, a desire for adequacy with respect to problems rather than for power over people, social interest in the Adlerian sense, cooperativeness, kindliness, interest in other people, and sympathy. Children are not humiliated by their parents as they are in our society. Inferior men are not humiliated by superior men, nor are the poor humiliated by the rich. The typical personality of the Northern Blackfoot Indian is one characterized by dignity and friendliness and containing little insecurity, suspicion, envy, jealousy, antagonism, hostility, or anxiety," end quote. So Maslow developed his hierarchy based on these experiences with First Nations folks. It's now clear that he got a lot of it wrong. That there's self-actualization and community actualization, and that it's not so much a hierarchy as a web of life in the sense of these needs. So thank you, Maslow. And also, it's fairly incomplete, if not misleading. So it is perhaps no surprise that European colonists preferred the life, liberty, and happiness of First Nations societies. When they were captured and battled by First Nations people and then given the opportunity to return, they overwhelmingly chose to stay among the natives. Even captured children, when confronted with their biological parents, chose to stay with their indigenous captors. As Benjamin Franklin observed, quote, "when white persons of either sex have been taken prisoner young by the Indians and lived a while among them, though ransomed by their friends and treated with all imaginable tenderness to prevail with them to stay among the English, yet in a short time they become disgusted with our manner of life and the care and pains that are necessary to support it, and take the first opportunity of escaping again into the woods from whence there is no reclaiming them," end quote. So what does this mean for us in the world that we now inhabit? If we're so inclined and wealthy enough, we can buy a homestead and live off the land, start a community, seek native teachers, and listen to the teachings of nature's God. Let me pause there for a second. Um, every place has makes itself available to learn from, and that's where the original instructions came from of the First Nations. Came from the sky, from the wind, from the earth, from the rivers, from the bison, the elk, caribou, etc. So there are original instructions in every place. So and we can essentially become indigenous ourselves by listening to them, because there'll be guidance about our own purpose and how to be and what to create next. But that might not be where you're at right now in this moment. So most of us are not so inclined to become feral indigenous, or wealthy enough to pull it off. And regardless of whether we're inclined or wealthy, we can also leverage a scientifically validated best practice right here and now within our current society to swiftly, sustainably, and substantially improve our happiness. The last 20 years of positive psychology research has revealed that happiness is best and most sustainably realized through fulfilling endeavors versus gratifying endeavors. So fulfillment is the net effect of taking actions over time at home, in our relationships at work, and in the community that is authentic to us or aligned with our purpose, and that has a generative impact on others. To take actions that are fulfilling, we need to know what fulfills us. Here again, purpose plays a foundational role. The purpose activation process is what allows us to know how we are uniquely called to impact others and be creatively fulfilled. The result is that people who have a strong connection to the purpose are 64% more likely to be fulfilled. They have happier marriages and stronger social networks. So our concept of happiness must include being sourced in our unique purpose. The centrality of a life purpose is found across cultures, intact cultures, that is. For example, the Mayan notion of Noal, quote, happiness and complete fulfillment in life are achieved by carrying through the work or function given to us at the moment of conception and birth. No one comes to the world because he wants to come, said the elders, who wisely assure us that we all have a mission to fulfill in life, a role to play to benefit humanity. Every human being has a Noal that defines a particular personality and makes him different from other persons. The life mission will depend then on his qualities, aptitudes, virtues, and defects as ruled by his Noal. Another way of thinking, like higher self or genius or diamond, like the thing that guides our life, which is not more than a divinity that guides and helps the individual. It is his gift, his donation, his responsibility. And if he should resign the mission, he would fall sick or, worst of all, die. End quote. Purpose is not a nice to have, but critical to life itself. As Jesus begged us to consider in the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic gospel, so not one of the officially canonized ones in mainstream Christianity, but nonetheless, it's part of the Gnostic Gospels. Quote, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So it's basically saying that, like, we have to live our purpose, or we'll be destroyed by not doing it. So Jesus understood that. Maya understood that. And so now, obviously, the science supports that too. Live longer, you're happier, better sex, more fun, more friends, all that. Additionally, recent neuroscience research reveals that we literally suffer when others are suffering. So alleviating or protecting people from suffering increases our ability to be happy and fulfilled. Perhaps this is due to our empathy, or perhaps it's because we are interconnected with all that is, as quantum entanglement suggests. Further, connection to and immersion in wild nature has shown to make us feel greater eudaimonia, which is like meaning, connection, contentment, and peace. This also echoes the native wisdom, such as that of Chief Luther Standing Bear, who said, quote, The old Lakota was wise. He knew that man's heart away from nature becomes hard. He knew that lack of respect for growing living things soon led to lack of respect for humans too. So he kept his children close to nature's softening influence. End quote. Uh, I'll go a step further here. It's not just close to, but Bill Plotkin's book, Nature and the Human Soul, which I regard as probably like the best book of adult development from a kind of both Western psychological and kind of earth-based place, that children's souls, they need wild nature, not a manicured lawn. They actually need to be like playing in the dirt, crawling around, getting bit by bugs, getting pricked by um, thorns. Just thinking about like one of those things on the tips of like dandelion leaves. And so, they obviously learn stuff about like what things feel like, smell like, taste like, all that. But it's actually like they need that for the development of their brains, of their souls, of their whole emotion, and like lots of good stuff about soil and the development of immune systems and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of science that supports this, and unfortunately, most kids are raised in these sterile, tightly controlled environments that are not wild nature. So we need to stop doing that. Like put them outside, let them get dirty, spray them off the hose, and bandage them up, kiss the boots. Stop trying to control and read damn into their lives. Therefore, we must make service to others in need, interconnection, and immersion in wild nature part of our concept and fulfillment of happiness. As we've explored previously, the Kayanekwa was not just a framework for rights, governance, and diplomacy, but it was the expression of a culture of liberty, equality, and happiness, a culture that required rites and rituals that connected each person to themselves, the land, each other, and nature's God. As James Adair observed in the History of the American Indians in 1775, quote, their whole constitution breathes nothing but liberty. And where there is equality of condition, manners, and privileges, as there is in every Indian nation, there glows such a cheerfulness and warmth of courage as cannot be described. End quote. In this sense, to become fully alive, free, and happy, we have to develop similar rites, rituals, and practices as the First Nations, activate our purpose, develop deep connections, serve those in need, immerse ourselves in nature, and become truly, deeply American in the native sense of the word. So Felix Cohen, who is a scholar of Native American history and culture, says, quote, the real epic of America is the yet unfinished story of the Americanization of the white man, end quote. So if you think about the First Nations as being the first Americans, we are only partially Americanized. Yes, like all these plants and medicines, and we've taken parts of their governance structure, parts of this and parts of that, and obviously genocide and slavery and all the stuff that wasn't part of that, of the Kayanekwa. And the real epic of our people, like the journey of us whites, or those who have immigrated here, or descendants of immigrants, is to become American in the original sense of the word. So that's what Felix believes, and many other scholars do as well. So that, in a sense, like that is kind of where our nation's purpose is leading us. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look exactly like how it was when Columbus and Sir Walter Raleigh and all those folks got here. But that, in terms of, like, in essence, in who we are, in our cultures, and our governments, and what we stand for, it is that. So as we all know, our government has not made good on its promise to ensure our rights to life, liberty, and happiness. Given that happiness is a critical part of our purpose, and knowing that we're incredibly capable people who want to be happy, why haven't we rioted? Perhaps we've just been ignorant of what happiness is. Perhaps Retico has blinded us to the existence of real happiness, or the proven means of delivering it, such as through purpose, nature, service, etc. Perhaps it is because happiness is bad for business. If being unhappy is our baseline, our orphanages can sell us unlimited bits of pseudo-happiness. Regardless of the causes to right this wrong, we will need more than a devotion to equality and a clear understanding of life, liberty, and happiness. We will need to activate democracy's spirit layer, e pluribus unum. So, here's a summary and the discussion reflection prompts. Life is inherently social, inclusive, interdependent, and requires safety, socialization, and sustenance. Liberty and happiness require us to initiate a move from our socialized to authentic self by activating our unique life purpose. Purpose, connection, service, and nature are the keys to our happiness, fulfillment, and well-being. So those are the 3 summary bullet points. Discussion reflection prompts. On a scale of 1 to 100, with 100 being the most free and 1 being least free, how free are you really and why? On the scale of 1 to 100, with 10 being the most, or with 100 being the most happy and 1 being the least happy, how happy are you really and why? The last question is, how would your life be different if we optimized our society, economy, and government for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness versus what it's currently optimized for? Ecocide, decentralization of wealth and power for the few. Thank you all. That concludes part 7, Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness. Thank you, Jared, for all your help. And if you're so moved, please make a contribution to the American Prairie. See you again soon.